Welcome to the Social Media Church podcast. I'm Nils Smith, joined by my friend Amber Smart. Amber, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I am so excited for this conversation, and I have followed you for many years. We've been friends for several years. That I followed you from back in the day when I was just getting started in online ministry, and you were really pioneering so many things at Life Church, and now you help tons of organizations and ministries maximize data. But for Amber, for those that don't know who you are and have understanding of your background, can you give a little context of
Yeah,
who you are and what you do?
yeah, for sure. So going back to 2007 is when I joined Life Church, and my two oldest kids had just re-entered elementary school. I was bored, and I thought, hey, this church is making a huge impact in my life. I'd like to give back. So joined their team, volunteered for a little bit before that, doing some just like uh, uh, tithe data entry type currency stuff, gifts and donations. And then a position opened up on the Digerati team. And at that time, nobody even knew what the word Digerati meant.
Yeah.
And we all had Razor phones, but we were
Yeah.
building an app, which, I had no clue what that even meant, having a Razor phone, but jumped in and was a part of the Uversion team and the Digerati team, which also included Church Online. So I wore a lot of hats during that time of helping all the various teams that fell under that umbrella. But yeah, so we launched the Bible app. I learned a lot. Every day they were speaking German. I would just write the words down and go Google them afterwards, clearly out of my element. But I love learning and I love problem solving. So that was a good place to be. So I did that till 2013, so quite a while. And in that time, I had adopted a child with some special needs. And so I knew at the time I needed more margin, and I could only be his mom. There could be operations leaders, multiple of them, but I needed to be his mom. So I actually made the decision to step off of the team completely. And the organization said, if we create another position for you, would you be interested in staying? That would give you that flexibility to go to therapy and do all the different things you need to do. And I thought, well, sure. So they were like, okay, it was 2013. The big word was big data. Nobody even knew really what that means. I don't even still know what that means. That was the term everyone was throwing around. And we knew as a church, we had a lot of it and that we weren't doing anything with it. And so I entered that role and ended up building an analytics team and had about 500 of our employees that were using dashboards on a regular basis by the time I left. So it was pretty fun and exciting. I am not a super techie person, but I know just enough to be really dangerous. And so
Yes.
I live in that space where I understand the stakeholders' needs and requests, but I also understand how to connect with developers and work within their space. So it was just a really great fit. In 2018, I left the team to do full-time consulting. And so that's what I've been doing ever since then. And I've loved it and enjoyed it. I mean, entrepreneurialism is not for everyone, but it's really great to be able to have those interactions with so many different organizations. So it's been fun.
I love it. And and I don't know if you remember even some of our connections, but you've been such a gift to me through the years I remember when I was at Community Bible Church and you allowed me just to pick your brain at one point for an hour on digital ads, and it transformed our ministry in many ways of how we were able to reach new people through digital advertising. And then hearing about it, I think Terry Storch was telling me about some of the stuff you were doing with Tableau and digital analytics, and basically, and I remember Terry telling me like data has to have a seat at the table. It's not the decision maker, but we need to use it to make better decisions so we can do more ministry. And it was so eye-opening to me seeing the investment, that Life Church is making. And then you and I connected again at the Rock conference several years back, and hearing about you kind of stepping in of like, man, you could take these learnings and share those with so many more churches and ministries. And the reality is a lot is changing and always changing in this space. But I think the problem is one, most churches don't know, just like you were in that place in life churches, because we think we have a lot of data,
Yeah.
but we don't even know what to do with it. And then even if we knew that we had a lot of data, they don't have the capacity of a staff of 500 where you can have such a specialty
Yeah.
role. And so that's where I think this conversation is so helpful of like, where does the church even begin to understand what data is and why it's important? So Amber, I'm curious, like, even as you look at data and you understand the church, what are some of the important even data points that churches need to be thinking about?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks to COVID, I think people are more open to allowing data to have a seat at the table and the ministry circle. So, just to give some context of what my client base looks like, I have anything from pharmaceutical to car manufacturing to business leadership or like business training to um, orthopedic body parts. I mean, it's just about
Yeah.
anything you can
Yeah.
imagine. So data is data. And what I say and why data is so valuable is data is not going to buy you lunch, right? Data
Mm.
is very neutral. It doesn't, there's no passion involved there. There's no feeling involved there. And it's not necessarily going to be the answer, but it's going to be a necessary component to be a part of your conversation that leads to the
Mm.
discovery. So data is not going to tell you what to do, but it's going to give you some context and some insight to allow you to know where to take your team in conversation. And so obviously I have a passion for churches. And what I found was when I began to branch out on my own, yes, helping the larger churches that do have the
Mhm.
funds and the people and the expertise and the margin to be able to fund something like this. But how do we help those that are maybe a couple of thousand or a couple hundred? Our smallest client is a couple hundred,
Mm.
200 per weekend. And then our largest, gosh, very large, one, the top
Yeah.
churches in the nation. So
Yeah.
it's, I always say, just start where you are and use what you have. And some
Yeah.
churches will even say, well, I don't have anything. And I'm like, come on, you gotta have
Yep.
something, right? Like
Yep.
there's industry standards, very few in the church realm, which I think makes it very, very hard in the church.
Yeah.
If I go to my pharmaceutical client, there's industry standards, like there's laws they
Mm.
have to abide by, right? And so same with banking, law, just pretty much any other industry than when it comes to nonprofit. So
Yeah.
with the church, what I try to do is come in and say, kind of assess. We begin by doing an assessment to say, okay, where are you? What do you have? What resources do you
Yeah.
have? What data do you have? And because of COVID, it's no longer just about attendance and giving. I mean, it's about
Mm.
engagement and how are people engaging with you in various different ways. Well, obviously, that takes technology to be able to measure that, but at least giving them information of what, okay, if you want to go there, here's what it's going to take to be able to get you there. Now,
Yeah.
you don't have to invest millions of dollars to be able to gain insights. You can do manual data collection. Yeah, granted, it may not be attached to a person, but you do some manual data collection over time, you're going to gain some insights that you can then begin to take action and make discoveries from. So, really, I always come back to it's about engagement, it's about customer
Yeah.
service, it's about what is that experience like when people come to your place, your event, or your weekend service, what kind of experience are they having and how are they interacting with you as a result of that? And can we measure that? So that's
Yeah.
really where I go back because it's about the people.
Yes.
And the data will tell you information about people, and that's why it's important. It's always about the person. So
Yeah.
again, data is not going to tell you what to do. And there's always this tension of like, how do you merge data and discernment? Like, it feels
Yeah.
like an either or, but it's not. It's a both and because the
Yeah.
more you get invested in data, the more you have to discern and rely on God on what to do because you're
Yes.
looking at the numbers, but then you got to interpret them. There's critical thinking, there is discernment. So I say they actually work really, really well together, and that you don't have to fear using them in tandem or that one is going to overpower the other. And
Yep.
there may be times you make decisions contrary to what the data is telling you, and that because everyone is agreement that that's the direction God wants you to go. That's great. Data still played its role that it needed to play in that scenario. So
Yeah. I love
yeah,
that. I love that. Hey guys, it's Nils, and I'm interrupting this podcast episode to highlight one of our sponsors. This sponsor is actually one of my companies, Amplify Social Media, where I'm the founder and CEO. And for years, we've been helping ministries and churches grow their message and amplify their message through social media done for them. And so as a consultant, one of the things that I found is that a lot of times ministries that have a hard time with capacity to fully do everything that they want to do on social media. So we built a team to help. We can help put your sermons on YouTube and podcasts and create social media clips and graphics and videos and all the things that you need to do with ads and even responding, helping you manage your inbox and your comments and messages. Our team is here to help. So if you want help amplifying your social media presence, reach out to our team. Go to amplifysocial.media, and we would love to help. We will hopefully talk to you soon. Let's get back to the episode. And so thinking about a church that thinks they don't have any data, where's a good starting point to even begin collecting data? And where do, like, we talk about church management systems and some of those kind of things. Is it putting everything in your church management system? Is it putting everything in a Google Sheet? Like where do people basically capture and store data just from a basic baseline?
Yeah, so very basic. So you'll get me on my soapbox if you start talking about church management systems. So there's great one there. It's the industry is making progress, but there's still a ways to go. And I think part of it is because there really are no industry standards. And so people just set up systems. And if there's too much flexibility, then they're not really sure what they're doing. But then if it's too rigid, they can't do what the extra things they're wanting to do. There's just this tension. So there's massive opportunity in that space. So I always tell people, start with a Google Sheet. So I have a church that is really small, a couple hundred, and they just recently switched over to handed the baton to a new pastor, and this pastor is younger and more connected to community and interested in data and introducing it into the conversation and its leadership. And so what we've done is we've just started a Google Sheet, and it's like they're tracking how many first-time guests they have, how many people they actually have on the weekend, how many people they're praying for, how many prayer requests, those basic interactions. Just think of those interactions that happen between you and a guest, and they're tracking all those in a Google spreadsheet. And then we use Tableau. We connect Tableau to that, and then they're up and running, and they have dashboards, and we can look at correlations between different things. We can look at trends. And this was just really simple insights that they didn't have before. And if you were, for the most part, if you're coming from the business industry or you have a business degree, this sounds kind of elementary or basic. But the deal is a lot of people who are in ministry because of the personal connection. There's a business, running a business skill set that may be lacking. And it's not that they can't learn it or that they're ignorant. It's just, it's never been taught. And that's another thing I would love to see be taught in like seminary schools and stuff. Is more of like data and business related things. So it's, you can start very, very simple. And honestly, if you try to go too complex or too fancy, you're going to overwhelm your people, and your ministry leaders they're going to be afraid to ask questions. And for me, I always say the goal of this exercise with them is to facilitate curiosity, right? It's like, let's be curious. And a lot of times in the church space, curiosity is reprimanded or looked down upon or not encouraged, and it's like, no, let's ask questions. Let's get curious, and let's see, what if we did this, what happens if we stop doing this, what happens? And data gives you that component to be able to have that conversation, to then, begin to get curious and test things and try things. And so a lot of ministry team leaders, I find, are pretty certain about what they believe or how things should go. And I just try to encourage that. I just try to encourage to disrupt that a little bit with some curiosity. And I think COVID did help with that. I think after COVID happened, a lot of people were like, okay, now what? And it's like, hey, that is curiosity, right? Yeah, that's what we do. So just helping facilitate that. And I find a lot of churches don't even really know how to, and it feels very uncomfortable
Yes.
and awkward. And so just encouraging that as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm a social media guy, and one of the things that I often hear that pains me when I talk to pastors about their social media is I'll ask them, "How's it going?" With your social media, and they're like, "It feels good, it looks good. I hear that it's good." And at the end of the day, it's like you have data to tell you. You like Facebook will tell you how many people you're reaching. YouTube will tell you how many minutes people are watching and where they're watching from and what devices and how long they're watching. There is so much data that can inform how it's going, yet we just ignore, I think, the data. And I think, to your point, there's so many different layers how that goes. And I think there are, Google Sheets is essentially free or, you know, inexpensive. And so it doesn't have to be super complex. You brought it up, or I guess I brought it up, church management systems. And people, there's always the debates of what's the best church management system. I'm curious, and I think we often, or I, as a consultant, want to stay agnostic to some of the different platforms, but we know there's some that are better than others. From your expertise, if you're willing to share, do you have a preference as to what it makes your job easier when it comes to just accessing data and managing data
Yeah.
when it comes to church management
Yeah.
systems?
So I always, because people will ask me this, what church management system what should, and then
Yeah,
I always say, well, what's your data strategy? Because
yeah,
they don't have one. So I'm like, okay, if your intention of using these systems, and you're collecting data, if you don't
yes,
plan to do anything with the data, but you're wanting great, personal interaction of collecting the data, whether it's a really check-in
yes,
system or whatever, then I'll say you might try Planning Center, or you might try something like that. But if you're wanting to do a really in-depth data analysis, then you need a church management system that gives you access to 100% of your data. Like, you need to own that data and you need to be able to
yes,
access it. A lot of these systems make getting to your data very difficult. And I don't think it's intentional. I don't think they're trying to withhold it. I just think that there hasn't been a lot of customer voice saying, we want to see our data and we want to see it this way, because they just don't know. They're just like,
yep,
you're telling me this is the one report to run, so I run it and that's it. So obviously, any church management system. So I have a client that's using ministry platform. It seems to work okay
yep,
for them. I have access to 100% of their database, so we pull and
yep,
create dashboards. A lot of clients that are on Rock, obviously, we can connect to 100% of that.
yep,
But if you were to compare Rock and like Planning Center, they
yep,
each have their own separate strengths, right? Planning Center,
yes,
you don't need an IT team. You don't have to build anything, right?
yep,
Rock, you're gonna have to have some resources there in order to set it up and support it to be able to make it work. So I always just say, like, well, what's your data strategy? And then
sure,
find a tool that supports what you're wanting to do.
yep,
But I mean, anything that I can have access to all the data, I'm great with. It's the tools that
yes.
make getting your data out very difficult, that are real cumbersome for us to work with.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the what I'm seeing in the space, and I don't manage data at all when it comes to any of our clients, but it feels like what I'm hearing in the space is Planning Center in compare, is probably comparable to like Church Community
Mhm,
Builder, or some of these kind of just built for you, use it as is probably the more user friendly, affordable, lower cost, doesn't need custom
mhm.
development. And then Rock, when you compare probably Ministry Platform and Rock as the two more customizable platforms, or Salesforce is probably the other one that I'm seeing some churches go to. Salesforce needs super probably customization, or HubSpot
Yeah.
for churches, and so it is an interesting space that is getting better. I think, as I'm hearing, and what we just at Hillsong Church is our home church, just moved to Planning Center, and the team's been really happy. And a lot of it is because they don't have to manage as
Mhm.
much, as we had our own custom built platform for many years that ended up being a big nightmare, and
Yeah.
headache to keep up with. And so, sometimes owning all of your data can actually be a hindrance to the ministry you're doing. But at the end of that, I am a deep believer in owning your data as much as you possibly can. One of the questions, Amber, are the things like, as big data was the talking point maybe 10 years ago, it's data privacy, data security that I'm hearing as kind of the buzzwords in the marketplace today. Can you speak to what those are and why those matter for churches?
Yes, and so many people don't understand this or realize this. Yeah, so anything that's personally identifiable of a person should be held very closely.
Yeah.
Don't, I'm always surprised at how many Excel files are being emailed or thrown around that have,
Yes.
counseling records associated with a
Yes.
particular person. And it's like, if this is a person of influence and this would have become public, that would destroy the trust level of the
Yeah.
organization. So I always say it's just an education piece. Like they've got to become aware of it. So if there's anything that you could find information that would tie back, you could identify back to a particular person,
Yeah.
that is information that you need to have a strategy of how you're going to safeguard that. And a lot of them do not. They just don't even have an awareness. But at the heart of it is the trust factor. And it's how do
Yes.
we protect our people's information, to protect our brand and just to protect our organization as appearing to be trustworthy. A lot of them, it's no different probably than like cybersecurity or whatever, where people freak
Yeah.
out when they walk in and see people's passwords written on their computer or whatever. It's
Yes.
it's kind of in that
Yes.
same boat. So I think a lot of it, I think I've never met an organization or a church that when I bring this up say, "Oh, that's not important," or "We're not worried about that." I think
Yes.
everyone's open and understands and has seen enough headlines of what happens when there's a data breach and or been on the other side of a data breach and how uncomfortable that is. It's very violating feeling. So I think it's just a lack of knowledge, and that is a component that we try to address when we are working with our clients. Is okay, you've got a Google sheet, but nothing in that Google sheet is personally identifiable. So it's just
Yes.
headcount information. If it needed to be individual based, it might just be an individual ID, but that's it. Like you're not going to be able to tie it to anybody. So we're very careful and cognizant of that and just try to teach and train people just the importance of that. And it really coming back down to the trust.
Yeah, that's huge. I think a couple of things here. One, as a church, we need to be looking to build trust in every opportunity in our community and with our people as we can. But I also think that as I look at the landscape and as I worked with a health tech company, and so we had to follow a lot of HIPAA
Mhm.
laws, and it was overwhelming and challenging, but it was also convicting as I think about how many, I think about even just like password sharing that we do. And it's like we just gave the intern the full database access so they could read everything. And it just is, we've got to be, I think, more thoughtful. And we're like, oh, we're kind of like, oh, shucks, it's just a church. And it's like, but we also have probably more private information
Right.
than any of that healthcare company even had of the clients that we worked with. And so this is a really important factor in both building trust, but I think also, I think there's a real liability as we, historically in churches, we've had to learn how to be safer with our kids. We've had to learn how to be safer with even our I remember I was in youth ministry and the kind of like things that we would do with like trampolines and stuff. And it's like, we don't do that anymore because that's a liability. And I think that we have some serious opportunities for data breaches and things that not just lose trust, but could actually be a tangible liability for our churches because we actually do have way more data than I think most churches realize that they have. And so I think being serious about cybersecurity is one thing to think that you're serious about cybersecurity and another to be really thoughtful and intentional in that area. And so I think, your point is so well made of we've got to prioritize this in our church and not let it be a talking point that it's like, yeah, I'm on board with that. But it's like, but what are you doing about it? And having a process and having a policy is really important. And if you don't know what your process is and what your policy is, then you don't have one. And the reality is it's always changing. And so I think there are new ways to learn, and it can feel overwhelming. But it is something that as we prioritize data and our ministries, security and privacy naturally need to be a part of that. When it comes, Amber, to privacy in particular, is there data that we shouldn't keep or have? on our people, or do we need to be letting people know what data we have on them, or is there anything churches should be thinking about when it comes to privacy and communication related to that privacy?
Yeah, obviously, I value transparency greatly. So I think they should make it very clear what they do with your information and what they don't do with your information. I think that's
Yeah,
very important to have that posted somewhere for people who are interested in that. So transparency is huge. I think the danger with data is if you are allowing ministry team leads to have access to data without training on how to appropriately use the data.
yeah,
It can be dangerous. We all have biases. I think you could definitely make some conclusions or make some decisions based on your interpretation of something versus um, having developed the training and skill set to understand how to use this piece of information in a critical thought process of how you're making a
yeah,
decision. So, really, I mean, I think anything about a person is sacred and should be held, closely. Obviously, I wouldn't like it if any of my information was sold to anyone or anything or
sure,
used, for products or anything of that nature. So it's really important, but it's also important to, realize whether you're using a Bible app or you're using church management system or whatever, are you aware of how they're using your data and your information?
yeah,
And that's what one piece I like about, tools like Rock. It's like if you're hosting it and you're housing it, it's all 100% in house. So yes,
yeah,
it's on you to protect it, but you have control over it, and you're going to
yeah,
use it. And I always just say, do you have systems and processes in place where if you found yourself on the court stand, you would be proud of saying, this is what we implemented and put in place.
yeah,
And that is a reality. I mean, I've seen several organizations, find themselves in a pickle because they didn't have the appropriate systems and processes. And it'd be a very unfortunate incident that might happen or information revealed that could have easily been protected or avoided if there had just been a simple process or procedure in place to protect that. So I always go back to, okay, imagine you're sitting on a court stand.
yeah,
Are you proud of what you have in place? Do you feel like, a jury would look at what you have put in place and say, yes, you did everything you possibly could
yeah,
protect or prevent something from happening? And if you don't feel like you could say that, because the reality is you're not ever going to have 100% system that guarantees
sure,
nothing will ever happen. But what the court will look at is, in good faith, did you do everything possible to prevent this? And a lot of the churches that I began interacting with, they wouldn't stand a chance because it's clear that there's, not any systems or processes in place. There's not training, there's not education. So, and all that seems, can seem daunting and seem, overwhelming, but really when we work with our clients, we start real simple and real basic. And it's a learned skill set over time that as we integrate it into their culture and the ministry team leads aren't afraid of it. They don't see it as big brother. They don't see it as a scorecard. They actually see it as a tool to celebrate wins and to discover
yeah,
opportunities and that type of thing. There's usually a cultural shift that has to happen, and then they become actually very passionate and will, come up with new ideas and on the forefront with those who have the data or collecting the data. Like they're where either the breaches will happen or it's here. So
yeah,
their training needs to really be there. So I think it's more in tandem of like, hey, do we use data? Yes, but you also have to respect it, have a reverence for it, and the fact that it is tied to trust and that it always goes back to people. So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
yeah. No, it's so good. I think too. I mean, I think you summarized it well. Of it's all tied to trust, and I think that we need to just question sometimes even our processes of is this are we being trustworthy in how we're using this data, how we're storing the data we're capturing. I want to maybe get into the far end of this because I actually watched a spoof video the other day that was funny, but I think kind of real. is what is too far. And the spoof video was, a mega church pastor, and it was like, hey, we saw you were here because we saw the facial
Oh,
scanning technology when you're coming in from the parking lot. And I think people, and I haven't seen it done, but I think it's actually a good idea, is like, if you have your phone and your app, and like you can check your kids in, but it geo tracks you, and it can even check attendance through your app engagement. And so there's some things where it's like, is now you could be transparent with it, but it's also like, I don't know, like what, in some ways, what are some of the trends that you see that maybe is like, is this too far? And I look at something like Amazon, and I remember when we first started taking credit cards in the churches, people were like, this is too far. And we have these kiosks in the lobby,
yeah.
and it's like, we have ATM machines now in the lobby. Like, this is too far. But it just made it easier of like, look, people are moving in this direction, and digital payments is a part of how people want to donate. We made that accessible. With some of these things with like facial scanning and tracking and apps, what is too far from your perspective as you understand this? And maybe what are we, maybe what are some fears that you see people have around data that isn't too far? We're just looking at it wrong.
Yeah. So I think we've come a long way. So I think what, like you said, what weirded us out a couple of years ago isn't so weird anymore because Target, Amazon, everyone does it, right?
Yes.
And I think we
Yes.
almost as a society have come to a place of frustration when someone isn't one step ahead. So like, let's say my son's school, why do I have to put my information on 14 different forms in one setting, right? That just feels very antiquated. It's inefficient. It feels frustrated. They rolled out a new electronic system where basically it was like, hey, here's your enrollment last year. Did anything change? Yes or no? If it did, great. And then it was done, right? I mean, it was like so
Yep.
great. So I think there's also kind of going back to, if I were attending a church and I were getting communication about, maybe baby baptism, but I don't have a baby and I don't like,
Yep.
that's not relevant to me. That just feels like
Right.
noise, right? That doesn't
Right.
feel personal. So there is this tension of, in order to feel a personal connection and that, yeah, the church knows me, I
Yeah.
have to allow them to monitor or see some of my behavior. But
Yeah.
I think as a society, I don't know, this might be different based on your generation or how old you are, or how much
Yeah.
technology you have experience with. But I find that if I opened up the Amazon app and I was being offered or shown like car parts, like I
Yep.
wouldn't, that would frustrate me because I would like,
Yes.
I've never bought a car part. I don't know why you're showing me this. I'm not interested in
Yes.
this, right? But when I
Right.
open it and it's something that my husband and I were talking about, yes, does it creep me out? But on the other hand, I've started leveraging it. So now it's like,
Yes.
I'm looking for a blue
Yes.
rug. When it's
Yeah.
I would
Yes.
really like a blue rug, and just watching see what
Yes.
comes over my Instagram feeds or whatever. So yes, there is this
Yep.
this line of like what's too far. And I
Yeah.
think I would say we're still trying to figure that out as a system. So it
Yeah.
would be really creepy if I didn't if I'll say, how do you balance the creepy with the frustration? I don't want to get
Yes.
content. I don't want to get communication. I don't want to if I don't have children in the youth program, I don't want to get tons of
Right.
communication about that. However, at the same time, how do you not I just need to know what you're doing with the information that you do have on me. So
Yes.
um, I don't, I know, I feel this tension. I know exactly what you're talking about. I feel like it's
Yeah.
still there, but I think it's shifting. And I think as the
Yes.
older generations um, evolve, move on to the next life, I can see the younger generations even more
Yeah.
so. I look at my granddaughter, and it's like there is this expectation like that the device is going to know what she wants, right? Like
Yes.
it would be extremely
Yes.
frustrating. Now, a lot of people just don't have an awareness of what they're exchanging for that, right? That they are
Yes.
the product and that. So, man, it's a tension, but I will say I'm more frustrated by feeling like the organization doesn't know me than when I feel like they
Yeah.
know me really well. And I don't
Yes.
want to if I attend a church it feels very inefficient for me to have to give you my name and info to attend an event. I should just be able to log
Yeah.
into the app, select the event, and you're like, great, Amber, we'll see you there. Right. Like
Yes.
there's that balance there. So I think if a church were to resist it completely, that would be very dangerous and detrimental. I think they would eventually be so irrelevant that, or they,
Yeah.
or if that is their goal, then that's the type of customer that, the guest that they're going
Yes.
to attract. And that's fine. Like if that's people are on the same page, then that's a great match. But I don't know if I would say what's too far. I personally do not have any clients that are utilizing facial recognition or,
Yep.
I mean, they do device detection, but Apple's really complicated that lately. So,
Yep.
um, it's more, and you've got to have a lot of technology and a lot of dollars to be able to do a lot of that. So that's a very
Yes.
minority part
Yes.
of the church circle. So,
Yeah.
um, I don't know. Can you know your guests too well? I don't know. I guess that's the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you articulated it so well because it's really managing the tension, and having the conversation. But I think you spoke it to me. And what I'll tell you what resonated with me is I was in a training last week with the Navy SEALs, with a group of ministry leaders, and the one of the Navy SEALs, I asked him a question of like, and the question was, and it was so interesting. It was aha for me. Is I was like, he was basically just talking about innovation and how within the Navy SEALs, how they innovated and even resisted new things like, sing in the dark glasses, or, things like that. And how the old guard would resist that. And I was asking, how do we better help the old guard, understand? And what was interesting, he was like, hey, I hate to tell you this, you're now the old guard. And I've now entered that season of life. And I think sometimes that we don't realize it when we're actually the resistors of like, there's some 20-year-olds in our organization that have a different perspective of us, of like, we've been the innovators and new thinkers, but it's like they actually see the world differently because they're like, I didn't have a phone when I was in
Right.
high school, like I know life without technology. They don't. And one of the things they love about TikTok, to your point of like, TikTok feels like the way it knows me is so crazy. I mean, it took like 10 minutes for TikTok to like start feeding me content that was so uniquely relevant to me. And it's like, I remember I had this perception of like, it's just going to be teenage girls dancing
Yeah.
on this app. And within 5 minutes, I didn't see that ever again. Like it knew me of like, it knew that I was going to be into sports and comedy and faith and, these kind of unique content types that it had data on, and data on me
Yeah.
quickly to give me what was unique to me. And that next generation, they don't want something that's like irrelevant to them. They actually are happy to exchange that data for a better user experience. And I think in some ways this is maybe even a tension that we feel, in some ways, even as an old guard, as to what, because of what we've known. But realistically, that's just an internal fear. That's not, if they're actually, like if we're able to provide a better discipleship experience, a better, fellowship experience, and better connect people to the things that are going to be most relevant for them, they're going to appreciate that, not be like, what are you doing with my data? What we're doing with your data is helping you grow closer to Jesus. That's what we're doing with your data. And if you're doing, and you're transparently doing that, and you're, practically doing that. And I think to your point of like, look, a lot of this stuff like facial recognition is further out, but it's coming, and I think tracking and so many of these things is like, it will become more and more accessible. And I think it is a tension that we need to navigate. But I think that we are quick to blow off. And especially I'm 43, like I'm quicker now to like be like, that's dumb. Like I see Snapchat and I'm like, that's dumb. Like, and I'm like the social media guy. And I think that we have to, I think, really not just so quickly check out what is weird to us initially, as irrelevant, because to your point of like, it's not something we've known. And I think we'll just have to see, step by step. But data, at the end of the day, the data we're capturing and the data we're using, is going to create a better experience for people. And that's only going to increase as we move into the future. And the opportunities and availability of tools like what we're talking about, and just like church management systems, they've come a long way, and they're only going to keep improving. And things like Tableau and data visualization is going to keep improving and going to keep helping us. And I think so. This is like, if you're in a place where you're like, I need to start. Like this is going to be an investment that is going to have long-term effects. And as we talk about AI and all these things that are coming, data is at the core of all of those things. And so having good data systems, whatever steps you take today and tomorrow, are only going to help you for the day after that. You're not going to be like, okay, now we don't need data anymore. Data is not a thing anymore. Data will only continue to be more and more a thing into the future. So this is a really important conversation that isn't new, but it's becoming more and more important. Amber, there's so many things. I feel like I could talk to you for 5 hours about data and geek down, and I'd love to get into case studies, but I would love to just hear if there's just some practical advice that you'd love to leave church leaders with in this conversation. And we'll leave afterwards, so how people can connect with you, but just some practical advice that you want to leave all church leaders with when it comes to data. What would be that core message that you want them to hear?
Yeah, I would like for them to consider that ministry and metrics can be used in tandem, and that it's not an either or thing. I would also encourage them to set some time to come up with a data strategy of sorts. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can just be simply, this is what we will do with data. This is what we want to do with data. And making sure that's very clear across the organization. Kind of going back to your point about, how do you protect and what's too much and what's ethical, what's not ethical. I would also encourage them to just begin somewhere. It is overwhelming. I remember feeling like I was drinking out of a fire hose. I felt so ignorant. I felt so ill-equipped. I didn't know what I was doing. But just start somewhere and begin to integrate data into your conversations. And again, data needs to have a seat at the table. It's not the head of the table. It's just a seat. And make sure that it's a part of the conversation. It's not going to tell you what to do. It's not going to, take away your rights or what have you. Now, the fear is that the data might reveal something about your organization that you don't want to know. So we've been investing millions of dollars into this program, and the data is showing that nobody evolves out of this program, basically just going through the act. So, but what I like with a church that I've had recently, we had a program that they had in place for 15 years. It was a very long program. I think it was 8 weeks at the time. The thing is 15 years ago, going through something for 8 weeks probably felt right. Today, committing to something for 8 weeks is probably not going to feel right for most people, especially busy families. Life just moves really fast. There's a lot going on. So while we can look at the data and say, oh man, this, self-awareness of ourselves as an organization kind of sucks right now of what we're seeing, we can then begin to get curious. Okay, what could we change? What could we do differently? What if we shorten the time from 8 weeks to 4 weeks or 3 weeks? We then begin to facilitate that curiosity. So I would encourage them to find ways to begin to encourage that curiosity, find ways to bring in just a little bit of data from here or there that they have. Don't feel like they need to be panicked about their church management systems. Clearly, I try to be as agnostic as possible as well. But at the end of the day, what's easier for us is, can we actually get to your data? That's what we need. Or is your system collecting the data points that we need to be able to answer that question? So I wouldn't fret over that yet. I would just simply see, okay, here's taking an inventory of what you have, what data do you have, and then spend some time to say, here's how we will use data and here's how we won't use data. So I have churches that are giving data at a person level is never available to anyone. That's that is their decision. That's where they draw the line. I have other churches, it's anyone can see anyone's data. I mean, it's whatever aligns with your culture and your preferences. Is one right or the other? I could argue both ways, to be honest.
Yes.
So it is really just, you've got to determine what works for you as an organization. And it's okay to change your mind later, right?
Mm,
Discoveries, you're going to see it, something that you could have an insight to or benefit from if you then allow data to be used a certain way you didn't have previously because you feel like the risk is worth the reward type thing.
yes.
So just know that, like you said at the beginning, this is growing, this is evolving. It's just going to continue to grow. We're going to look back, 5 years from now, we'll look back
Yeah.
on what we did today, and there's going to be things we're doing today that make us cringe. You know what I mean? It's just a part of it
Yes.
evolving and us learning and growing. So I would just encourage that. Be curious and open to learning and trying and experimenting new things, and just seeing what God will reveal to you in that process.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Amber, for sharing those insights. And I do, I feel like what my eyes are, and I feel like the conviction that I'm having in this conversation is really just the thought of like, you look, we're not going to lose weight if we don't look at the scale. Our bank account isn't going to get better if we don't check it. Or our debt isn't going to get paid off if we're not monitoring, what our debts are, and seeing the progress that we're making, or the deeper in debt that we're getting, that we don't need to fly the plane blind. We need to look at the data. And I love that it's not ministry or metrics, it's ministry and metrics. And metrics are going to help you do your ministry more effectively. And that's the end goal. It's not so you can have cool dashboards and, a bunch of, spreadsheets to look at. That those are just the tools to help you do ministry more effectively. And this is such an important part of how we do ministry today, and how we're going to do ministry more effectively into the future. And it doesn't have to be, and I love too that you're like, I'm not a tech person, like it doesn't have to be massively techy. But this is one of those key areas of focus that churches need to make. So Amber, thank you for building this unique expertise that you have, and sharing it and prioritizing it to serve churches and ministries. How can people that want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you
Yeah,
online?
so our website is smartmetricsdata.com, and it's Metrix. So smartmetricsdata.com. Yeah, you can reach out there, schedule a 30-minute call just to get to know our team and for us to get to know your scenario or your situation and seeing if we would be a good fit to help you. We also have a website called the153effect.com that has some videos and some guidebooks on how to, how do you manage this tension of ministry and metrics. And so feel free to check that out as well. So we offer
Awesome.
very custom solutions. So it's not a one solution for all. It's, I could show you 100 churches and 100 dashboards, and they all look different. So
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, I cannot encourage our listeners enough to reach out and at least just have a conversation. I think for full transparency, there's no sponsorship. There's no, like, Amber is just a friend who I reached out to and just said, hey, I think the church needs to hear from you around this topic. And so thank you for your generosity to share your wisdom here. And I hope people will continue to lean in to data and conversations. And I would say, I hope you'll lean in to the help that Amber and her team might be able to provide to your church, because I think that kind of investment is going to pay long-term ministry of effectiveness and fruitfulness ahead. And so I want to encourage you to go and do that and reach out to her. And so, Amber, thank you for the time, and thank you everyone for listening. The one thing I would ask for you with this podcast is if you would leave a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever it is that you're listening. We read all the reviews. It's so helpful for us to better understand what it is you're learning, what it is that you're preferring when it comes to the episodes. And so we would love to get your reviews and your thoughts about the podcast so that we can continue to make this a better platform to help your church do better ministry, more effective ministry through social media and digital platforms and all the things online. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again on the next episode.